My brother scammed old people as a living, so I made one call to the FBI. My brother Bryce has been running scams on elderly people for a living since he was 23, and our family has been telling itself a different story about his career for almost as long. If a relative asked what he did, Bryce would say he ran a small business in the customer outreach space. If our father asked about the trips to Manila, Bryce would say he was rolling out an operations expansion. If anyone asked about the cars or the apartment or the watches, Bryce would say the business had been very good this year. The version of Bryce our parents talked about at every dinner party was a self-made entrepreneur. The real version was a 31-year-old who paid 5 people in a converted office park in another country to spend their days calling elderly Americans and convincing them their Microsoft accounts had been compromised. It started in college. Bryce ran a small operation out of his dorm, pretending to be a tax collector, calling about back taxes. He told my parents he was doing affiliate marketing on the side, and made enough that year to buy a used BMW he said came from a friend. By his mid-20s, he had moved on to fake tech support, full-time, with one helper out of his apartment. By his late 20s, he had a full call center offshore, an LLC stack to move money through, and a list of about 300 names that he and his employees would rotate through every month. He talked about it at family events when our parents were not within earshot. There were nicknames for some of the elderly people he had hit more than once, broken down by first name, state, and a one-word description of what made them easy. A running personal list lived in his head of the largest amounts he had ever extracted in a single call, and he would tell that list at Thanksgiving to whichever cousin he had decided would not say anything. I tried to bring it up to my mother once at the counter. Bryce is doing well, and you are being judgmental. He works very hard, and he is the only one of you children who has been able to take care of us in the way we hope to be taken care of. My mother had recently received a $15,000 check from Bryce for new windows. The thing that finally broke me happened in June. My grandmother, who lives independently and is 86, called my mother on a Sunday evening in tears. She had spent that afternoon on the phone with a man who said he was from Microsoft Account Security, who told her that her computer had been hacked and her bank account drained, and who walked her step by step through wiring $52,000 to a holding account that was going to freeze the criminals before they could spend it. $52,000 was almost everything she had outside of Social Security. My mother spent the next 3 days on the phone with my grandmother's bank, the bank that received the wire, and the local police. None of it came back. I drove to my grandmother's apartment the following weekend. She did not want to eat or want me to leave, and she kept asking me if she was going to have to move in with my parents. That month, I did a quiet inventory of everything I knew about Bryce's operation. 3 years earlier, I had stayed at his apartment for a week while my own was being renovated, and I had seen things. The name of the LLC he sent his commissions through was familiar to me. His offshore manager's name had come up at a holiday dinner. I had heard him use the phrase Microsoft Account Security once at a dinner the year before. The folder on his laptop where he kept his spreadsheets was familiar because he had once asked me to email a vendor invoice and pointed me at the wrong folder. I confirmed what I already knew before I did anything else. At brunch, in front of our cousin, I asked Bryce what the largest wire he had ever pulled in one day was. Bryce told us, smiling, that he had hit a woman in Ohio for $52,000 3 Saturdays ago and that he had barely had to work for it. 2 weeks later, I made one phone call to the FBI tip line. The agent who returned my call took notes for an hour and asked me to send him everything I could remember in writing. Into the email went the LLC name, the offshore manager's name, the phrase Bryce had used at dinner, the folder on his laptop where the spreadsheets lived, my grandmother's bank statements, and the names of 2 cousins who had heard him describe specific victims at family events. The agent thanked me and asked me not to discuss the matter further with anyone, including my parents. I did not hear from the FBI again for 4 months. In October, federal agents executed search warrants on Bryce's apartment, on a small office he kept in the city, and on a residential address in Manila he had been paying rent on for years. Bryce was indicted in November on a long list of federal charges related to elder exploitation, wire-related offenses, and money laundering through his LLC stack. But little did I know, things were just starting. I expected fallout. I expected yelling, maybe a big fight at the house, maybe my mother calling me in tears and telling me I had ruined everything. What I did not expect was nothing. For 2 full weeks after the indictment came down, not a single person in my family called me. Not Nancy, not Gerald, not a cousin, not an aunt, not anyone. My phone was just quiet. After about 10 days, I sent Nancy a text, just asked if she was okay. Nothing came back. Not that day, not the next day, not ever. So I called Gerald. His phone rang twice and went straight to voicemail, which meant he saw my name and sent me there on purpose. He did not call back. By the second Saturday, I could not take it anymore. I got in my car and drove to my parents' house. Both their cars were in the driveway. I knocked. I could hear the TV playing low in the living room. Gerald opened the door, looked at me, but did not step to the side. He stood there like I was someone collecting donations. He said, "Your mother does not want to see you right now." I asked him what Nancy had told him. He looked past me at the driveway for a second, then back at my face. "She told me what you did to your brother. She told me you called the FBI on your own family." The way he said it, your own family, like that was the crime. Like the crime was not what Bryce had been doing for years. I started talking. I told him about the grandmother. I told him about the $52,000. I told him about brunch, about how Bryce sat there smiling and said he had pulled a $52,000 wire from a woman in Ohio and barely had to work for it. I told him our grandmother lives in Ohio and that she lost exactly $52,000. He held up his hand. "Bryce is sitting in a federal facility right now. Your grandmother lost some money to a stranger on the phone. Those are 2 separate things, and you connected them because you have always had a problem with your brother." He had already decided what was true and what was not, and nothing I said on that porch was going to move it. I turned around and walked back to my car. The front door closed behind me before I even reached the driveway. I sat in my car for a few minutes with my hands on the wheel. I had spent weeks thinking about how hard it would be to tell my family the truth, and I never once thought about what would happen if they just refused to hear it. I drove home and called Dimitri, the cousin who had been at brunch, who heard Bryce say the number out loud. out loud. He sounded nervous right away, like someone hoping this call would not come. I asked him straight, "Do you remember what Bryce said about the $52,000 wire?" There was a long pause. Not the kind where someone is trying to remember, the kind where someone knows exactly what you are talking about and is deciding how much trouble they want to be in. Then Dimitri said, "I remember, but your mom already called me. She told me if I back you up on this, I am out of the family too." Nancy was not just shutting me out. She was building a fence around the whole family. Dimitri said he was not lying for Bryce, but he was not calling anyone either. He was staying out of it. I understood. Nancy had a way of making threats that did not sound like threats, saying things in a calm voice that let you know exactly what would happen if you crossed her. Within a few days, my phone started buzzing with messages from relatives I might see once a year at a cookout. An aunt sent me a text. "I cannot believe you would do this to your own brother over jealousy." Whatever Nancy was telling people had nothing to do with what Bryce actually did, and everything to do with making me look like a bitter younger sibling who could not handle his success. A voicemail from an uncle came in while I was standing at the stove. His voice was tight and disappointed. He said, "Your mother is heartbroken. I hope you are happy." He did not ask my side. He had already gotten Nancy's version, and that was enough for him. That was when I called Reed, my cousin Reed, the other one at family events where Bryce talked openly about the people he was scamming, one of the names I had given the FBI. He picked up immediately and did not even say hello. He just said, "I already got the call from your mom. She wants to know if I talked to the FBI, but they are going to subpoena me, right?" I told him I honestly did not know. Reed took a breath. "If I get subpoenaed, I will tell the truth, but I am not volunteering. Your mom scares me more than the FBI." Nancy had called Dimitri, called Reed, texted aunts and uncles. She was running a campaign, going through the family like a list, making sure anyone who might have heard Bryce say something at a dinner was either too scared to talk or too convinced by her version to question it. And then it hit me. If she was going down the list of people who knew things, she was going to get to Marguerite. She was the victim, the one who lost $52,000. If Nancy was trying to keep people quiet, Marguerite was the most important person on that list. I grabbed my keys and got in my car. When Marguerite opened the door, the apartment was dim. The blinds were down in the living room, the kind of thing she never did because she always said she liked watching the birds on the tree outside her window. She looked thinner, not sick, but smaller somehow, like she was taking up less space than she used to. I asked her how she was doing. She said, "I have been eating, but I have not been sleeping." Then she asked the question I had been dreading. "Have you heard from your mother?" I told her no. She nodded like she expected that. Then she said something that made my blood go cold. "Your mother called me yesterday. She said Bryce is in trouble because someone in the family went to the police. She asked me not to talk to anyone about the money I lost." Nancy had called her own mother, an 86-year-old woman who had been robbed of almost everything she had, and asked her to keep quiet. Not to protect Marguerite, to protect Bryce. To make sure the one person whose loss actually proved what Bryce had done would not be able to confirm it to anyone who asked. I looked at Marguerite sitting in that dim living room with the blinds down and made a decision right there. She deserved to know who was fighting for her and why. I leaned forward and said, "The person who called the FBI was me, and the reason I called is because I believe the people who took your money work for Bryce." Marguerite went very still. She looked at me like she was not sure she had heard me right. She said, "Say that again." So I did. I told her I believed the call she got came from Bryce's operation. I told her the number matched. I told her the script matched. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She just turned her head and looked at the wall like she was looking through it at something very far away. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the clock on the shelf behind her. Then she turned back to me and said, in a voice that was steady and clear and more sure than anything I had heard from anyone in my family in months, "Your mother knew. She had to have known." 3 days later, I was at the counter making coffee when someone started hitting my front door. Not knocking, hitting it. The kind of pounding that makes the whole frame shake and sends your heart into your throat before you even know who it is. I opened the door and Nancy pushed past me before I could say a word. She walked straight into my living room like she owned the place. Gerald came in behind her, eyes on the floor, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders pulled in like he was trying to make himself smaller. He looked like a man who had been told exactly where to stand and what to do, and had no intention of doing anything else. Nancy stopped in the middle of my living room and turned to face me. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were hard. She did not sit down. She did not take off her coat. She just stood there and said, "You are going to call whoever you spoke to at the FBI, and you are going to tell them you exaggerated. You are going to say you were angry at your brother and you made assumptions." I said no. I said what I told the FBI was the truth, and I was not going to call them back and lie just to make things easier for Bryce. Nancy did not blink. She just kept going like she had already planned for me to say no and had the next line ready. "Then you are not my son anymore. I mean that. You will not come to the house. You will not come to holidays. You will not call your father. You are done." I looked at Gerald, still standing near the door, still looking at the floor. I said, "Do you believe Bryce scammed his own grandmother?" Gerald opened his mouth. Then he closed it. He looked like a man trying to swallow something that would not go down. Then he said, "I think there are things we do not know yet." Not yes, not no. Just a nothing answer that let him stand in the middle without picking a side. Before I could respond, Nancy cut in. "We know that Bryce built something from nothing, and you tore it down because you could not stand watching him succeed." I felt the last thin wall between patience and honesty give out. I told her about brunch. I told her Bryce sat there in front of Dimitri and said, out loud, with a smile on his face, that he had pulled a $52,000 wire from a woman in Ohio. I told her our grandmother lives in Ohio. I told her our grandmother lost exactly $52,000. I told her those two numbers match because they are the same number from the same crime committed against the same person, and that the person who did it was her son, and that she already knew that. Nancy did not flinch. She did not look away. She just stood there and said, "Bryce talks big at family dinners. That does not make him a criminal. You took a joke and turned it into a federal case. A joke. $52,000 stolen from an 86-year-old woman who could not sleep and could not eat and was afraid she would have to give up her apartment, and Nancy was calling it a joke." That was the moment I stopped trying to convince her, because I understood something I had been avoiding for months. Nancy was not in denial. Nancy knew. She had probably known for years. She knew what Bryce did for a living. She knew where the money came from. She knew what that $15,000 check for new windows actually was. It was not generosity, it was silence money. It was Bryce paying for her loyalty, and she took it, and she let it replace the part of her brain that should have been asking questions. I looked at her standing there with her jaw set and her coat still on, and I said it. I said, you knew what he was doing. You took his money, and you looked the other way. And now you want me to do the same thing so you do not have to explain to everyone what kind of mother looks the other way while her son robs old people. The room went quiet, the kind that feels like all the air just got sucked out. Nancy's face changed. It went tight, the muscles around her mouth pulling in, the color draining out of her cheeks. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, something colder, something closer to a warning. Then she said very quietly, if you say that again to anyone, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. She did not explain what she meant. She did not have to. Gerald finally spoke. He said, that is enough, both of you. Nancy did not respond. She turned and walked to the door without looking at me, without saying goodbye, without slowing down. Gerald followed her like he had been doing his whole life, following Nancy through a door because that was easier than standing still and making his own choice. The door closed, and I was alone. I stood in the middle of my living room for a while. Everything Nancy said was still hanging in the air like smoke. You are not my son anymore. I will make sure you regret it. Done. I picked up my phone and saw a text from Mackenzie, the woman I had been seeing for a few months. She asked if I was okay. I called her and told her everything. When I finally went quiet, she said, you did the right thing, and I think you know that, but I also think you are waiting for your mom to tell you that, and she never will. She was right. Through all of it, through the FBI call and the indictment and the silence and the texts from angry relatives and the threats, the thing I wanted most was not justice. The thing I wanted most was for Nancy to look at me and say I was right, and hearing those words from someone who had no reason to protect a story felt like the first solid ground I had stood on in weeks. 2 weeks went by. Then my phone rang, and the name on the screen was Knut, the FBI agent who had taken my original tip. He asked me to come in for a meeting at the field office. I drove there the next morning with my stomach in knots. Knut met me in a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs and a stack of folders. He told me the investigation had expanded. They had recovered records from Bryce's offshore operation and matched call logs to victim reports across 9 states. Then he slid a printed sheet across the table. It was a list of 17 names, all of them over the age of 75, with a dollar amount next to each name. I scanned the list from top to bottom, past name after name, stranger after stranger, number after number, and then near the bottom, I stopped. Marguerite Boucher, $52,000. Seeing it printed on a government document in black ink on white paper, next to 16 other people who had been robbed the same way, made it real in a way that nothing else had. Knut said, your brother's operation made contact with your grandmother on a Tuesday afternoon using the Microsoft account security script. The call lasted 1 hour and 43 minutes. The wire was initiated during the call. Your brother personally received the commission on that transaction. His name is on the internal ledger. I asked if Bryce knew it was his own grandmother. Knut paused. Based on the records we recovered, the contact list your brother's team used included full names, ages, and states. Your grandmother's full legal name was on that list. We cannot prove he recognized it, but we also cannot prove he did not. I sat there and let that settle into my body like cold water. My brother may have seen our grandmother's name on a list of targets and let the call go through anyway. Or he may have assigned it himself. Either way, her name was right there, and the call still happened, and the money still moved, and he still took his cut. Knut told me Bryce's legal team had been trying to negotiate a plea, but the elder exploitation charges carried mandatory minimums that were hard to get around with 17 victims over 75. Then he told me one more thing. Your mother has been calling our office 4 times in the past 2 weeks. She is asking us to drop the investigation, says the family does not want to press charges. I want you to know that does not affect a federal case, but I wanted you to be aware. I drove straight to Marguerite's apartment after the meeting. She led me to the dining table and poured tea, and I watched her hands shake as she held the kettle. I told her Bryce's operation had been confirmed by the FBI. I told her the charges were serious. I told her the case was moving forward. I did not tell her that her full name had been on Bryce's contact list. I could not do that to her. She held her cup with both hands and looked down at the table. Then she said, your mother came to see me 2 days ago. She told me that Bryce made mistakes, but that he is still family. She told me that if I loved this family, I would tell the FBI I did not want to be part of the case. She told me I could get my money back faster if I cooperated with Bryce's lawyers instead of the prosecutors. I asked what she said back. She looked up at me, her eyes clear and steady. I told her I am 86 years old, and I have been lied to enough. I told her I will talk to whoever asks me questions, and I will tell them the truth. And I told her that if she came to my apartment again to ask me to protect the person who stole from me, she should not bother coming back. Marguerite reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was light but firm. She looked right at me and said, you did the right thing. Do not let your mother make you feel like you did not. Bryce made his choices. Your mother made hers, and you made yours. I am glad one of my grandchildren chose me. Bryce's case moved through the federal system over the following months. Nancy and Gerald did not speak to me. Eventually, Dimitri told me he had been subpoenaed and that he told the truth about what Bryce said at brunch. Reed did the same. I started visiting Marguerite every Sunday. We would eat together and she would tell me stories about my grandfather. She never brought up Bryce. One Sunday, she looked at me across the table and said, you lost some of your family this year, but you did not lose yourself. I drove home after that and sat in my car. I did not regret the call. I knew I never would.